Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this ETR Insights event. This panel will get reactions and commentary from members of our ETR community for our latest macro views survey data. And this survey tracks our overall IT spending plans, how geopolitical turmoil is shaping IT strategy, how organizations are keeping up with AI, and much more. So I'm Darren Brabham. I'm joined by my analyst colleague, Doug Brule, here to co-moderate this session. Let's meet our esteemed panelists who are collectively have several decades of experience in IT leadership between them. First, we have Morgan. Morgan's a VP of IT security for a large business services and event management organization. We have Jonathan, who's Director of IT, Data Science and Analytics for a large retail consumer enterprise. Nick is a Global Chief Information Security Officer for a large energy utilities company. And Brad is Chief Information Officer for a mid-sized financial institution. So, welcome, folks. We're really happy to have you here as always and looking forward to the conversation. But before we begin, I do need to state our disclaimer. We'll be recording today's event, and the intent of this event is for it to be an open discussion of differing views and opinions without disclosing any material, confidential, or non public information. And the opinions shared and discussed here today are our own and not necessarily those of any past or present employers. So, with that disclaimer out of the way, welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. And we are going to be looking at the macro views survey. I'll be putting that up on the screen here shortly. And just want to flag that we had a record number of respondents this time around to our survey. We had 1,859. And it goes in conjunction with our technology spending intention survey, which we do quarterly. So, to give kind of a frame on this, the survey closed April 3rd. And we had, of course, major tariff announcements on April 2nd. So there's a lot of stuff that might not be captured in this particular data set, but it's still interesting. And we've had a lot of yo-yoing since. So I'll share that data on the screen, but I'm going to kick it off to Doug to get us started with our first question and go around. And I'll let you take it from here, Doug.
Great. Thank you, Darren. And thank you, our panelists, for joining us today. We certainly appreciate your time here. But maybe looking back over the past year, a lot has changed and a lot hasn't changed. We still have a very elevated threat environment on the security front, but we also have a new administration in the U.S. We have potential interest rate cuts and the timing of those, as well as trade barriers too. So a lot going on. But getting to a question, if you had to describe the biggest constraint or challenge that you're facing today versus a year ago, maybe something that wasn't on your radar at the beginning of 2024, what would that be? And then as sort of the flip side to that, is there an opportunity today that you're seeing now versus the year prior in terms of greater sort of inclination for headcount growth or any other opportunities to invest in your respective IT stacks?
Well, I would say certainly something that wasn't on our radar last year was just the uncertainty that we have right now, certainly with tariffs and the markets in general. And as we look at, purely from a functional business perspective, we've got a couple of things. We've got our investments and balance sheets that we have to pay attention to, and some of the assumptions that we made going into 2025 have changed. So now we have to revisit funding for initiatives for the year, and then again looking at our customer base. So being in financial services, we're partnering with a number of customers that also have to deal with that uncertainty. So if a business is looking to invest in a new capital expenditure or growing their business, there's a lot of hesitation to do that, especially on the manufacturing side. So there are a number of just different factors that we're having to deal with because of that. And so we don't know how it's going to play out. So I think what we're seeing is just a lot of dialing back of investments until things hopefully settle out a little bit. And as far as opportunities, I think what we've seen is it's really doubling down on where we can focus to gain efficiencies. And sometimes I think the conversation around AI has evolved to the point where AI is now more of a tool that we have to factor into our normal strategy. That's a pretty powerful tool, but it's really caused us to focus more energy and effort to where can we find efficiencies and where can we find better ways to support our customers through this. Um, through this very strange time that we find ourselves in.
Great. Yeah. Appreciate that, Brad. And maybe a quick follow-up to that. You mentioned with the constraints, how are you building in that sort of flexibility in with facing this level of uncertainty? Is it sort of a mandate from either your executive leadership or your boards? Do you have different sort of macroeconomic scenarios or assumptions under which you have different sort of investment allowances? What's sort of the approach to dealing with that risk that you really can't quantify fully at the moment?
For us, that continues to evolve because we felt like, as in 2024, as we were looking at 2025, we knew there would be some changes, certainly as there is with any change in administration. So we had a pretty wide range of factors and values going into the year. But what we've experienced really has exceeded that and has been outside the bounds of what we predicted. And so now we find ourselves going back to not only revisit some of those assumptions and make some adjustments, but also again widen that scope to look at I would say more extreme scenarios on both sides, positive and negative. So it's something that we're working through because we need to be again as flexible as possible. So we have a high tariff plan and we have a no tariff plan, and then we have a couple of plans for ranges in the middle. And so we've just been on this path of just building out a number of new scenarios that we didn't have going into the year.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. We'd love to give Nick, Morgan, or Jonathan an opportunity as
Yeah,
well.
I can chime in a little bit. A lot of what Brad said, absolutely feeling it. As the CISO for a European energy company that focuses a lot on green, you can imagine the impact. When Trump was first he won in November, we started early on thinking about the things that we should do and what we should think about. But the impact certainly did disrupt the energy industry over here in Europe in a lot of different ways, pulling out of the Paris Accords, stopping offshore leasing and things like that. It definitely has had a big impact on a lot of the energy companies over here in Europe, for sure.
Thank
Yeah, and I would say we're gravitating towards more predictability in just a lot of our thought and decision making. Meaning, in the past, we up to this point had been focused more on just business capabilities and a lot of the modernization, paying off technical debt. That those were things that were secondary. But really what we're looking for now is flexibility and being able to pivot very quickly to something that's predictable, versus something, versus focusing all of our internal efforts on business capability. And that's been a pretty significant shift, just based on our past history.
Thank you, Morgan.
I think for us, I'd echo what the other three gentlemen, have said. In the retail industry, we're monitoring on, daily, if not hourly, developments on the tariffs, every tick of inflation, um, supply chain, operational situational awareness is incredibly important part of our daily routine. Um, and all of this has led to um, increasing or heightened focus on controllable expense. Um, what technical debt was just mentioned. What initiatives have to you know be pushed ahead. What can be shelved. Um, where can cloud expense be reeled in? Where does it have to continue? All of these things are part of our daily conversation.
Great. All great points from the four of you. Maybe one more quick one for me before I pass it back to Darren. But it, do you see any sort of idiosyncratic or specific factors impacting the industry that you're in that might not be applicable to sort of all enterprises, regardless of the respective sectors they're in? Any particular challenges that you're facing or are really feeling an impact from?
Is that for me, Doug?
That's for anyone.
Go ahead, Jonathan. Or
We we feel like we're in the headlines every day, being in retail. We kind of getting it from all sides. From the business press, from the political players, you know, and anything having to do with shortages, shelves emptying out. Those are scenarios we're trying to avoid.
I've seen over the last 3 years, when I first got over here to Europe, the Ukraine crisis had just started, and that's made that major impact on energy companies as well. At first, energy prices went up. Everybody was worried about things that were happening, and obviously now 3 years later, there's kind of a status quo. So energy prices have gone down, which means organizations are making less profit. So outside of the Trump administration, that's the Ukrainian conflict has had a substantial impact over here in Europe.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah. If there's nothing else, then like I said, I'll pass it back to Darren.
yeah, and I think so. Thanks, Doug. So I've heard a little bit that's poked out here about exactly how and where we're doing some belt tightening here, and I kind of want to put on the screen here some of folks who said their IT budgets were going down, some of the methods they were using to achieve that, and reducing staffing costs is kind of a one that jumped up. It's still the highest overall, but as you can see, it was sort of ticking down as of last survey, but now is back up as a method for how people are going to reduce their spend, delaying and stopping new projects, reducing hardware spending, CapEx spending. But then there's sort of reducing cloud resources and consolidation of vendors as well. But another thing that's really on its way up here is consulting and outsourcing spending as a method for cutting back. So, roughly looking at the two of these as sort of headcount or staffing reductions. I want to see if this resonates with you. Is this something you're seeing in your organization, or how are you approaching this? Is staffing, on the table? Is it seen in conjunction with AI and efficiency? Would love to kind of go around a little bit and see how that's reflecting in your organizations.
I would say most definitely. From a staffing standpoint, we've already done some restructuring this calendar year. From an outsourcing standpoint, we've also shifted focus more to offshore. Consulting practices are a mix where, before we were maybe 50-50, 50% domestic, 50% offshore, where now we're more at an 80-20 mix. And it's all primarily focused on cost. And then the other thing I would mention is just on the consolidation of vendors. That's almost a daily conversation on how we reduce just the sheer number of vendors, and are there opportunities to reuse an existing capability in a core platform versus purchasing something else, or can we consolidate that capability into something else we already own?
Yeah, a lot of vendor rationalization happening around the tech stack, I assume. Anyone else want to chime in on some of these seems methods of belt tightening here? Maybe the staffing question or other kinds of
Yeah,
consolidation
certainly.
projects?
Yeah, this is Nick. Yeah, definitely. I think it all starts from the reduction in overall investments. A lot of energy companies are reducing the investment in the U.S. by quite a bit. I hear some are cut by 1/5, which can be up in the billions of euros. So I think that's the first part. And then, of course, if you're not investing, you're either reducing or trying to find ways to save somewhere else. And definitely staffing costs, consolidation, licensing costs, looking at outsourcing in even cheaper areas, like moving outsourcing from maybe India to Asia, even further east. I think a lot of organizations are looking at pretty much every opportunity and option that they have to reduce their overall spend on IT.
Yeah,
Except,
excellent.
I would say, except in one area,
Mhm.
and that's in cyber. Cyber still seems to be somewhat protected from getting handed some bills for reduction.
Yeah, and
Yeah, I
good
would.
timing on that. We just put out the our state of security, our annual state of security study is forthcoming very quickly, or just came out. But yeah, one of the things we're finding in that data is people still are spending in cybersecurity. That is kind of one area. And Doug, you know a whole lot more about security on this, so feel free to chime in. But want to let
Yeah.
anyone else add to this if they can.
I would echo, security is an area for us that is also least or last impacted from a staffing perspective, from a cloud resource perspective. I would say, within cyber, what I have seen going on though is vendor rationalization. That does continue kind of across the board, not just in cyber, but everywhere. Cyber has seen vendor rationalization occur.
Yeah, and
And
I would say for us, it's cyber is also pretty sacrosanct. I think the challenge that you have anytime you look at consolidating vendors is that often takes additional investment, which is what you're trying to reduce. So you really have to balance those two aspects. Is the ROI really there in to be able to invest what you need to invest to consolidate? But when we look at our model and how we reduce costs, we typically reducing staffing costs tends to be a last resort for us. So we actually have a a a a flexible amount of contractors that we bring in, and so we'll release contractors before we'll release FTEs, and we've sort of designed our structure for that really starting in COVID, and then again with the with what we've been dealing with in 25, it's actually going back a little bit to that model. So that's one of the levers we're looking at pulling, and certainly delaying new projects or pushing our hardware life cycle out a year. So typically we run on a 3-year cycle, so we may push that out to a 4-year cycle, and then push the refresh to a future year.
I would just add one thing. I agree completely, or at least what from what we've seen or experienced, that cyber is generally protected, but cyber is also asked to do more now, and in many cases, from a just product rationalization or tool rationalization, the focus has shifted a little bit to seeing how we can leverage our tooling within cybersecurity more effectively, whether it be through asset management, software metering, log management. It's how can we use that data to enrich other areas of IT versus just keeping it completely isolated. And that's an area around, and one of the drivers is cost optimization.
And I love those comments around justifying security tools, sort of next to the idea that this area is protected more than other areas of IT. With that in mind, Darren mentioned that we just released our annual state of security survey, and we hear this platformization narrative from the larger platform vendors who are pushing their own products, admittedly, Palo Alto. But within our recent security results, like last year, we found that only 9% of enterprises were actually planning to decrease the total number of security vendors within their stack, and more of an equal split between increasing the number of vendors and staying the same over the past 2 years. So with these tighter budgets, with the sort of overall push to consolidate, why might security be sort of exempt from that? Is it just the mission critical nature? Is it the more of the increased threat environment? What's sort of the mix of reasons that might be outperforming in terms of prioritized budget?
Variety of threats, it's mission critical, and not violating customer trust.
Nice and simple. Love it.
Definitely. I would go with all those as well. And I think that, cyber has always been running things a little bit, I mean, at least in my experience, running things a little bit tighter. I mean, as far as, vendor consolidation and, just for example, whenever I come into an organization, I rationalize the portfolio. And, if I have for instance, if I have an E5 Microsoft license, I'm like, we should be using everything in that E5 license. I mean, those are the kind of things that you look at, trying to create a scenario where if the reductions do happen, that you've got a tight story to where you can show that, hey, there's not a lot of slush or a lot of money that's being played with here. It's very serious. And I think the media and the vendors have done a really, really good job of letting people know how serious the cyber threat is. I mean, everybody from the WEF to Gartner to pick your consulting firm, McKinsey or BCG, everybody's talking the same language to all the executives almost every time they see them, that cyber's a threat. The bad guys are out there. They're after your data. They're after your information. They're ready to ransomware your entire organization. So there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt as well. And I think that unfortunately plays a part of it as well.
Great. And maybe even getting more granular on the threat side, like you said, everyone knows what's going on. And I think that's really spiked since the invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. We've seen a big spike since then. But have you noticed any particular either style of attacks or attack vectors? Is it sort of targeting the human-based identities? Is it more within networks or endpoints? And part B of that, have any tools in your stack been particularly helpful in mitigating those, or happen to be the ones that are sort of bearing the brunt of this of this sort of increased volume of threats that you're seeing?
Yeah, I see two things. I'll just go with my top two. First is what we call malicious or unintentional insiders. People either have been hired and they were able to get through the system and they're working for somebody else who they come in to whether it's industrial espionage or whatever. But majority of the time it's way more simpler than that. It's a phishing exercise. It's phishing emails. The phishing emails have gotten exponentially better since the public access to ChatGPT and Grok and all the other large language models that are available. It used to be where you could look at an email and pretty quickly you could ascertain, oh yeah, that's a fake email. The language is wrong. The spelling is bad or whatever. But with AI, that's really kind of made it more difficult for the users. And that is probably one of the things that if I was going to say anything that's keeping me up at night is definitely the major phishing attacks that a lot of companies are seeing. And then secondly, if the bad guys can't get at you directly, they come after you through a third or fourth party. And I've seen that in the last couple of years accelerate to a much higher level as well. I mean, we're talking, in 2022, you might see maybe 10 or 15 relative attacks, against the particular companies. But now it's getting, almost weekly. So there's definitely been an increase of the bad guys trying to get into these third and fourth party vendors and then work their way through them into the bigger organizations. Because the bigger organizations, and that was a question you asked as well, tools or what kind of technology stack, a lot of the organizations have put in place ransomware protection. They have endpoint protection, next generation endpoint protection, which kind of, prevents that type of thing. They've got, they're more mature with their security operations centers. The security stack has really matured over the last couple of years as well. because of the amount of money that's been available. So I think that's all that together is really made a big difference. But phishing emails, the bad guys want to get as biggest bang for their buck as easy as possible. They're lazy. They just want to go the easiest route possible. And then the vendor one, that's definitely big number two on my list.
Right. Yeah.
We see.
Oh, I'm sorry, Gordon, go ahead.
I was just going to mention, in addition to those, we see targeted attacks where, the bad actors will actually target a help desk, and in some cases, overtly try to bribe an agent, to create credentials or, establish some sort of path in to the network. And that's been something that really seen kind of pick up ever since the MGM incident. About a year and a half ago now, or maybe it's been longer. But those are more difficult to combat against, with traditional security tools. But from a process standpoint, you have to use things like call center technology, voice recording, looking for patterns in what's being said, keyword identification, that sort of thing, which aren't really traditional security tools, but that is a path that's pretty alarming, frankly. And then I think, Doug, you had asked, what tools and vendors. CrowdStrike is probably the biggest on the endpoint. I know it's what we use. And then just for augmentative technology on phishing, there's a company called Abnormal that has proven to be pretty effective.
Right. Yeah, and I love that you mentioned the MGM Caesars incident. I think that was an employee credentials theft based one, but yeah, 100 million in damage, I think was the estimate that came out there. So
Yeah, and that one was an impersonation. It wasn't an overt bribe. But at this point, if the impersonation doesn't work, I mean, they'll just offer the agent, and in many cases, a third party outsource help desk money,
yeah,
to
so
get
that's
them.
awkward. But if there's no one else who wants to jump in on this, then I'll again go back to Darren.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think we're circling around this here, and I pulled up on the screen for you the question we asked this time around about geopolitical factors that impact your organization's IT. Cybersecurity risks are up, of course. This is what we're seeing that are linked to geopolitical tensions. We have shifts in U.S. government technology policies are also up there, but economic uncertainty is kind of a general idea, and then this idea about trade restrictions and tariffs and supply chain. And again, the window of which we asked this survey closed on April 3rd, right? So a lot went on that the day before that, and many days since. So kind of an up and down here, but we've sort of touched on this, but if I were to say what's kind of the top political event that's happening or regulatory uncertainty that's impacting your strategy or execution more than any other, like what keeps you up at night the most about this?
Uh, just from a business perspective, we do rely a lot on travel, and people being, wanting and willing to travel, to attend events and, seminars, what have you. And just the boycotts, that some countries now have told, or in turn, within the context of the company or the country itself, Canada, for instance, don't go to the United States. Things along those lines that are somewhat unpredictable, intangible. We don't know how long it'll last. Those can affect our business.
Okay. Yeah, the tension from overseas about U.S. companies and products and so on has been interesting to see. Anyone else want to chime in with kind of their top geopolitical factor that's affecting their strategy?
Yeah, I think the increasing pressure here, just really over the last few days on Powell to reduce interest rates. Anytime interest rates go up or down, it's a double-edged sword. So there are pros and cons there. But if rates are artificially, we'll say, lowered, then we just don't know what kind of impact that will have. We can run some models and do some predictions, but we're already seeing pressure, almost upward pressure on interest rates, certainly on inflation rates, and if they're artificially lowered, then what happens to investments, what happens to inflation, what happens to job growth, et cetera. So there'll be a number of ripple effects there, and it certainly changes our pricing structure, our income, our cost of funds, et cetera. So that's recently that's the biggest one that is in our crosshairs right now.
Okay. Anyone else want to talk about kind of the biggest impact, biggest threat out there?
Well, one of the things maybe over the last 9 to 12 months for us, being a retailer, consumer facing, um, I would just echo, what's on the page, the regulatory changes around, data privacy, or the, increasing awareness on the part of, you know, both consumers and legislators about data privacy has us focusing a lot of our attention there, sort of proactively to stay ahead of, developments, legislative and regulatory developments there.
Yeah, very interesting. I want to needle into that a little bit if we can. So this idea about sort of regulatory changes around AI and data privacy. At the root of this, there's these are data governance program type questions. These are, things that involve your company lawyers, but also how data is handled, data quality, data cataloging. It's all the various regulatory, lineage and provenance of the data. And then it also is dovetailing into various AI and generative AI type programs, which are very data reliant, of course. So maybe if you want to veer a little in that direction, I'd love to hear how your organizations are responding to some of these developments and trying to stay ahead of a very shifting landscape when it comes to data regulations and data privacy requirements. Nick, I saw you come off mute. You want to chime in on this one next?
Yeah, sure. Early on, we developed our own in-house, if you will, Chat GPT. We don't call it that, but when Chat GPT was first released, I saw that. I was like, "Oh, this is going to be huge. This is the next big thing." And immediately I started getting calls from people, "Hey, can we use Chat GPT?" And of course we issued out policies on what you couldn't do with it, and then we decided, hey, this is probably a good opportunity for us to develop this in-house. So we created our own large language model with the help of a big company, and that's the route that we went. Now, over the last couple of months, there's been more and more showing up. The DeepSeek from China. The general guidance that we've been giving is that you can use it for the weather or sports or anything you want, but don't put any company proprietary information in it. And that's where we settled. I know that there are some people who have gone all the way to block anything like that. But based on our organization, we felt that we could, and I know you guys are going to probably crucify me for this, but we could trust our people to do the right thing at least most of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else? How you hear about how you're responding or moving along with these data changes here, data privacy changes, regulatory changes?
I would add a little bit. I mean, there are multiple new European regulations that are coming to fruition and becoming, actual regulatory requirements. We've got NIS2, we had NIS1, now we have NIS2, we have DORA, of course, GDPR. There is a constant influx of data protection. A lot of European countries have what's called works councils, which you want to house data in your particular country. You don't want it to go elsewhere. It makes it very, very complex to offer from an IT perspective a lot of services. You have to work really kind of out of the box almost to figure out, well, if we're going to go with this, how do we make sure that the data stays in the European Union versus being flushed over to America or China or wherever. So the regulatory landscape gets more complex all the time from what I've seen.
Yeah, I love that point, Nick. You have more sort of a I guess the multinational framework with GDPR in the EU. The US, it's a lot more patchwork, right? You have industry specific ones like HIPAA, you have California CCPA, but you really don't have anything on a national basis that's as comprehensive as Europe. So with that in mind, for large enterprises operating in all these markets, how do you sort of deal with that challenge? Do you have to segment data, just be very careful where it's being stored, how it's being utilized, or do you do sort of a highest common denominator of, this is in this specific region or this specific industry, this is how it's kept, so we're going to do that with all of our data regardless. What is the approach there?
Yeah, there really is a drive to keep the data in the EU. Absolutely. If for instance just for example, there's a Microsoft tool and it does X, and the data isn't, and Microsoft can't say that the data will stay within the European Union, well then a lot of European companies won't even use it. They'll forbid it. Those types of things happen all the time. But one of the bigger challenges is that, although there is the EU, a lot of countries will behave in different ways. And what do I mean by that? Germany, for instance, has not passed this NIS2 requirement because the governmental change, as maybe Germany had recently gotten a new chancellor. So they're way behind the power curve. Now we also have countries that have already adopted it and made it law, made a requirement within their country. So and we're operating in multitudes of countries. So we have it's a huge challenge to get make sure that we keep up to speed. We're not violating any rules or regulations across all these different European countries. It's a huge challenge.
Yeah.
Great. That's very helpful. Thank you, Nick. Anyone else see that?
I would say we've taken the approach of, and we refer to it more as the lowest common denominator, not the highest, but essentially we try to align our internal policy and practices around some of the most restrictive, just and then applying it universally, to our systems and processes. But I mean, it is very challenging to keep up with it. Seemingly on a weekly basis, there's something new that pops up that we hadn't known before, and we have a lot of different, I guess, paths we follow for information, and just trying to track those. But ultimately, there's also a little bit of wait and see internally to know, okay, how and kind of where will all this settle. So in certain cases, we tend to be, much more aggressive in trying, to predict, how enforcement, will take place. What does this mean? But, especially in the world of AI, it's really hard to predict, what is realistic just in terms of oversight, and trying to manage through that.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe if there's nothing else there, we could shift towards the hiring and the headcount front of this. So we talked a little bit about ways to sort of shift investments in response to all these events, but just focusing on hiring or total headcount at your respective organizations. Could you talk us through any more recent evolutions or plans in reaction to anything that we mentioned so far, whether that's expected interest rate changes, tariffs, and then are those things, could you characterize those as proactive or sort of reactive actions taken to right size your orgs and in dealing with that?
For us, we've already done some of that, just during this calendar year, but we have both onshore and offshore teams internally. It's some of it's outsourced, but some of it, we have actual offices, throughout the world that house development teams and various groups. We have tried to shift more work, to those teams, as well as just outright outsourcing, to offshore, or more outsourcing to offshore based resources. But in the U.S. or domestically, I wouldn't say we're on a hiring freeze, but it feels like it sometimes. Certainly a lot more justification if there's turnover, requires much more the job recs or requisitions are scrutinized at a much different level than they were a year ago.
Yeah, I would echo what Morgan said. New recs are being scrutinized much more closely. Open recs were still allowed, still being, given the space to try and fill them, though, it's interesting. I've got a couple open recs on my team. They've been open for a while. Um, and I feel like the recruiting team has taken a new stance, with the news of the economic environment and word of layoffs and things like that. It yeah, I don't have evidence for this, but anecdotally, it feels like, they may be trying to lowball candidates. I've had three candidates for three different, for the same rec just in the past 6 weeks turn down offers um, from us, and it feels like, you know, for reasons of either base compensation, or location requirements, uh, that something's, that the strategy has changed a little bit.
Yeah, and you mentioned location requirements. Is this are remote positions on the upswing, or hybrid positions, or are you all kind of back to office now
We're
on your
back to
corporate side?
office. Satellite sites have been, we have had some restructuring going to the, remark earlier. I'm not sure, who mentioned it, but we've been consolidating some satellite sites, and there's kind of a return to headquarters move afoot. Um, and that definitely has uh, reoriented some of these recs to different locations, and that has clearly, at least in my case, has made filling those recs more challenging.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think also want to let's piggyback on this too, and continue to kind of respond to Doug's question about your proactive, reactive stances, that kind of thing. But to kind of further follow up on the staffing issue, this idea of generative AI. Now, our early data on this is not really showing that Gen AI is causing reductions in staffing, or layoffs, or fewer hiring. But we certainly have heard in many places in our survey data, anecdotally, when we interview people, that it's helping them train people to be more efficient or more effective in what they're doing. But I want to know if there's anything concrete you're seeing, or where you think it'll go in the next few years, with Gen AI, generative AI, or AI-enabled tools, whatever, affecting who you're hiring, what they're doing, all that kind of thing. So maybe speaking on that would be kind of interesting too.
Yeah, I'll
Morgan?
jump in.
Sure.
So, go ahead, Morgan.
Oh, okay. I was just going to comment that, I think it's generally expected that, new hires, regardless of what area of the business they're in, are comfortable leveraging AI tools. And in many cases, it's a question during the interview process. Do they use or have they used these tools? In other roles, if they're new, but there's certainly what we have seen is from a productivity standpoint, those that have embraced the tools we've offered, certainly do appear to be much more productive. Um, they're able to turn things faster. You in the KPIs we do have to measure throughput. That there is an uptick, most certainly. But to your comment, Darren, I mean, to my knowledge, we haven't displaced, or there's no plan to displace anyone because of generative AI.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would generally echo that, but I do think we are looking at a couple of different things, because you have generative AI, which which is going to help in certain areas. So there are use cases where that's valid, but in my experience talking to others, it's tough to put any of the publicly available LLMs in a production environment in any meaningful way. Certainly nothing customer facing because they're just not consistent, they're not reliable, they're not accurate enough to be able to put them in that space. And somebody else said before that they were building their own internally, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the future. Maybe not LLMs, but SLMs that are really targeted at specific use cases. I think we're going to really start to see an uptick there. We're going to start to see a lot of value there, and then I think we're going to start to see more pressure on roles that exist. I think the other piece, and this is something that we're looking really closely at, is as AI agents become more capable, we're going to see a lot of roles like, we've gone through and inventoried a number of roles that don't require a lot of training, but do require decision making, informed decision making. And we're already starting to see with agents from, like UiPath, that's relatively new, and some of the work that we can do in Agentforce, we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, if you want to call it that, which is, there are a lot of decisions, there's a lot of work that people do that we feel like we're 6 months to a year from being able to meaningfully replace, maybe 5% of staff in that range. And so I think the technology is finally getting to the point where it becomes an actual reality if you're willing to invest the time and effort into building the structure and the governance around your AI implementation that allows you to trust it enough to run in a production environment and do meaningful work.
Yeah, well put. Yeah, it's the governance that's really important there. Anyone else want to add in on some of this about Gen AI and hiring or staffing?
I'd like to throw my 2 cents in.
Sure.
Yeah, we don't see Gen AI as a replacement. We see it as a supplement. So it's an addition that helps you do what you do. On a daily basis, you can review things faster, you can get executive summaries, you can, craft an email much quicker. I think those are the kind of cool things that the AI is able to do from a day-to-day perspective. And of course, it depends upon what business you're in as well. But the big benefit for us is being able to see it from a production perspective. And what I mean by that is, in a previous company I worked at, we used AI to actually catch it's a long explanation. I'll try to make it as short as possible. Position oil platforms in such a way that the methane burn at the top of them would be directed by the AI at the optimal wind speed. So I think there's a lot of opportunity out there for a lot of organizations to use AI to do things that people aren't doing that can help the business make more money. And I think that's something that because people are scared. People are, I don't want to be replaced by AI. I don't believe that it's capable of doing that. I don't know, maybe in the future it may be, but right now I don't think it's mature enough. I mean, you think about your average interaction with it, and there's always mistakes. You can ask it to do something, and tell it not to do something. It'll still do it every single time or every other time. So I think there's some inconsistencies in how strong people believe AI is based on their experience. So bottom line, I think AI is a supplement for the humans, not a replacement. And I also believe that AI will be able to be used to help companies, make more money in ways that don't replace people, but make their current production more efficient and effective.
Yeah, well put. Thank you, Nick. And Doug, I think we've got maybe time for one more question before we wrap up, and want to thank y'all again for your time. So I'll kick it over to Doug before we head into the final stretch here.
Yeah, thank you. And Brad and Nick, that's actually a great segue into our last question. So we spent a lot of time thinking about can sort of separate the hype and marketing around Gen AI from the actual use cases and what it can sort of affect during implementation and runtime. We touched briefly on the maturation of these tools and agentic AI. It seems like every vendor has rolled out a Copilot and really is trying to trial that with everyone. Hard to see where that equilibrium kind of plays out, but maybe just as a sort of philosophical exercise. Just in your personal opinion, in 3 to 5 years, based on the sort of trajectory of development that you're seeing with these tools, how does that play out in terms of what your stack looks like? Nick, you talked about augmenting staffing. How does that actually result in headcount reduction in a few years, or where does this essentially play out as these tools get sort of more precise, as users get more comfortable with using them and prompting them? Very open-ended question there for everyone.
Well, let me grab on that real quick. Just real quick. I think AI will help us do the things that we don't want to do. And what do I mean by that? In the past company, I had a team of cyber experts. I had a lot of people who spent a lot of time with eyes on glass, meaning reviewing logs. And AI was able to do that much more efficiently, much faster. So those people, they weren't gotten rid of. They actually got to do stuff they wanted to do. They got to spend more time doing the good stuff and not doing the monotonous stuff that us humans don't like to do. So I think, again, supplement, not replace. AI will be able to do a lot of the tasks that humans don't want to do, and that will eventually come to, it'll eventually evolve to more and more and more. But I think that for me, that's where I said it's supplemental. It'll help us humans do the things that we don't want to do, and then we can repurpose those people that do even better things.
Great, thank you.
I think it could help with the acceleration of paying down technical debt. And what I mean by that is we've historically had a lot of projects, or I've seen projects in other organizations, be tabled just due to the sheer cost, of taking, importing these applications from one platform to a next, or to another. But with the ability, the rapid code generation, putting these tools in the hands of a few developers, I think it doesn't put some of these projects out of financial reach, and ultimately could accelerate companies moving and being able to shift to more modern, secure platforms.
Yeah, I think we hear use cases for financial institutions about like getting off of COBOL, and there are very few COBOL developers still working but a lot of kind of critical code is still based in that. So that as one example for getting that rote work kind of off the heads of humans.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think, this may be a little bit of a different view, but what we're starting to see is, if you look at the data space, 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I built out a data warehouse that was traditional. It was Snowflake, Informatica, moving data around. But now you're starting to see an emergence of tools that may take a lot of that off the table, but also may change your reporting approach completely. So natural language interfaces that allow you to retrieve the data that you're looking for very quickly, and in a fashion that presents it in the way that you exactly want. Now there's still the topic of governance and some of the controls that are around data, and so we have to figure that out. But I think data is at the forefront of where we're really starting to see a paradigm shift, and we're already talking about replacing applications. Like, do we really need Salesforce if we have a natural, more of a natural language interface that can adapt to the user and what they want to do? And that's a narrative I'm starting to see come out, and that's a really fundamental paradigm shift from how we operate as organizations today. And I think that's where the disruption is really going to come in, as opposed to, I mean, yes, there AI, excuse me, AI is absolutely positioned to enhance and augment and help, but I think where we're going, the path that we're on, is going to change that paradigm completely. So, we'll see, but that's what we're building our strategy around right now.
Yeah, especially on the SDR side of sales. It's a great point.
Yeah. Well, excellent, gentlemen. Thank you so much for your time. Morgan, Jonathan, Brad, Nick, it's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed speaking with you and covering a lot of terrain in this conversation from our macro views survey. I want to remind everyone listening that on our website, clients can find a growing body of transcripts, recordings, and analyst summaries from other one-on-one and multi-person panel conversations just like this one. And you can access these downloads or search for keywords and vendor names in our transcript database at any time. Thank you so much, gentlemen, and thank you for making this such a great insights event.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.